Alright, so now let's go ahead and let's set up a render for our glass. So let's select our scene here, and I'm going to add in our dummy here, and these two lights that we've got, let's add those in as well. So let's call this layer glass, and now let's assign a shader to our window here. Let's right click, assign new material, and let's assign an AI standard. And in our AI standard, let's call this glass shader. And I'm going to go ahead and set up some basic parameters for a glass material. So for glass, you want to turn the diffuse to 0, give a specular of 1, turn on Fresnel, and under the refraction, turn the refraction to 1, and the index of refraction for glass is 1.5. And we also want to turn on Fresnel uses the index of refraction. And so this is pretty standard for glass. So now what I want to do is, for Arnold, anything that you want to render transparent, we're going to have to select the geometry and tell it that it's not opaque. So in the shape node of the object, let's go down to the Arnold tab. We want to deselect opaque. So one thing I've also included in this scene here is a secondary window, and the reason for that is if we were to start rendering right here, we'll do a test here. We're going to see all the pre-shadow that we've made here. So if we go to our Arnold render view, let's just start a render here. And you can see we've got the cracked glass already. So one thing I'm going to do to cheat this is create a secondary window that's not cracked. And I'm going to key the visibility on and off for both of these. So just before it hits the window, frame 4, I'm going to key our secondary window here on. And at frame 5, let's key the visibility off. And let's do the reverse for our window here. Let's key it on at 5, but 4, we're going to key the visibility off. So they're just going to switch. So that's going to solve that problem. And now let's just go into our render view here, and let's go to a frame that we like. And let's start an IPR here. So the first thing we can see, we don't have enough of a ray depth for the refractions here. You can see that we're getting a lot of black. And so for that, we're going to have to go into our render settings, and we need to increase the refractions ray depth here. So now we've got enough rays to bounce all the light around, so we won't have any of these black spots. So another thing that we're going to do, let's go into our transform node of our render stats, and before we had this set to primary visibility only. So what we want to do also, we want to turn off the visibility of our background, but we want to view it in the reflections and the refractions. So you can see now we're getting all of that in our glass, but we don't want to view it in the background. And also, let's go into our shader for our geometry, and we want our geometry to be matte. So let's go under the AI standard and let's click Enable Matte. And that's going to hold out all our geometry now. So now, let's go into our render settings and let's just reduce the sampling a little bit. I'm going to reduce the volume because we're not rendering any volumes. And the SSS we can reduce to 1. Glossy we can reduce to 1. And for a final render, we're going to bump up the camera samples a little bit, but we'll just leave this like this for now. So now what I want to do is I just want to create something inside the room, as it is just a boring Lambert shader in here. So I'm just going to duplicate this plane, and I'm going to assign a surface shader with a image to the plane just to reflect a room. So let's kind of do something like this. And let's select this plane and let's assign a new material. Let's go down and assign a surface shader. And under hardware texturing, let's turn the texture resolution to highest so we can see our photo a bit better. And let's go to out color and let's map a file. And now included with your source images, we'll have this interior JPEG here. Let's hook that up, and we're going to have to rotate it. So let's go into our texture here, and let's rotate the frame 90 degrees. So now we got something to reflect inside the room. So okay, one thing I'm going to do now, I'm going to create a little light for the inside of the room. So let's go create lights, and let's create a area light. Let's just place this in the room. So now let's just go back into our camera, and in our Arnold render view, let's take a render. So there we go. So one thing to note, that a problem that you might face is when we do our shatter, sometimes the normals get messed up on the geometry. So you might be left with some weird looking reflections in your geometry that just don't look natural. And to solve this, you would go into your glass here, and under mesh display, let's set the normals to face the camera. So if you choose set to face, this should resolve the problem, as sometimes NCloth can have problems with some of the normals after you shatter something. So one last thing we want to do is, now that we got our render looking fine, let's go in and add some AOVs to our render here. So let's go to AI standard and let's add in indirect, diffuse, indirect spec, refraction, and refraction opacity. Let's add all those passes in. And now if we select this right arrow here, let's select the driver. And here, we just want to make sure to select merge AOVs, and it's going to put all these passes in the one file. So now, let's go ahead and render this again. And now you can see we've got all our passes here. And we actually don't want indirect diffuse. We want to throw in direct spec instead of indirect diffuse. There we go. So let's just remove that. So we've got direct spec, indirect refraction, and refraction opacity. So there we are. So now, with this looking good, let's go and set this off for a render. Let's go and set up our namespace here, and we've got our frame range, our camera, and we're going to render this at 720p.